morning, Adrian. How are you today?
Morning, Pete. Yeah, good, thank you. Thankful for the lovely weather.
Yeah, it's slightly warm in the studio at this end, but I've turned the fan off so we don't have too much background noise today.
Yeah, it's a bit chilly in my server room, but yeah, I'm sure we'll cope.
Yeah, if you like swapping, let me know. So today we're going to talk about rootkits. I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a bit of a change of direction from what we've done in our previous talks and chats. But again, one of the things that I think is becoming a lot more relevant in terms of everyday users now is rootkits and rootkit exploits. Now, it's not something that's been, I think, very prevalent in an everyday user's mind, but I think it's something now that we need to make people aware of. Again, you have a good background in them. I've come across them a few times, but I think your experience in looking at rootkits is going to be invaluable in this discussion. So shall we crack on? I mean, really and truly, first things first, what is a rootkit, Pete?
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a term, like most of these terms, it's been abused a bit, but originally I would have described it as malware that's hidden below the radar, down inside the operating system or in one of the drivers of the operating system, typically in an endpoint device, but obviously also possibly on a server. Now,
Okay.
Eugene Kaspersky says, software used by cyber criminals to gain control over a target computer or network sometimes appear as a single piece of software, but are often made up of a collection of tools that allow hackers administrator level control over the target device. And it's that last comment, the compound adjective administrator level, that gives the whole thing its name, root, because we're thinking of root access, so fundamental, top of the tree or bottom of the tree, depending how you look at it, administrator access. And the kit part gives the game away as far as he describes it, a selection of tools. And probably the worst thing for the victim will be a collection of remote access and exfiltration tools.
Excellent. So obviously they've been around a while. I mean, some of the things that I've read certainly about rootkits was more in the espionage level of days, really, especially with from what I've seen, the Americans and looking at rootkits inside servers of certainly Iraqi server systems and nuclear power stations and such. But I think my first experience of a rootkit from a user level was the old Sony digital rights management piece,
Yeah.
where they were basically created a rootkit to install on every user's machine that inserted a music CD into their computer, and which installed basically a rootkit on their computer so that it monitored every single piece of music and licensed it and reported it back to Sony when you put it into a machine.
Yeah, the good old pre-GDPR days. I think, yeah, a lot of, yeah, I mean, it is a rootkit, of course it is. It was something that, yeah, certainly in the early 2000s, that a lot of otherwise supposedly legitimate sources and manufacturers, vendors, would create this sort of software to allow them otherwise impossible control over the end user's device, and with, in their own view, I guess, legitimate reasoning. But yeah, the technology is the same. If the software can do something, I guess, at a fundamental level on the computer without needing to seek permission from the user, and frequently in a clandestine manner, then I think we can call it a rootkit. So yeah, those sorts of techniques, however they, whatever the logic behind developing them is, certainly originally we would have seen the more sophisticated types of rootkit, as you suggested, being created by governments. For example, Stuxnet which was targeted at the centrifuges in use by the Iranians during their attempts to refine radioactive material, and ultimately,
allegedly,
they say for a power station, we might say for other reasons. And that sort of technology, developed jointly, I believe, by the Americans and the Israelis, is very sophisticated and deep inside the operating system. And in this case, in Stuxnet's case, was a multi-step attack. So, inserted on a USB stick and targeted to search the network for specific industrial control software, and then to infect that industrial, and very, very targeted, and lots of rootkits are very, very cleverly targeted. And of course, with the majority of the world using Windows as their client operating system, and very often, Active Directory as their fundamental network authentication technique, then Windows is going to be one of the most targeted environments. But rootkits exist for every operating system, from Linux through Windows through Apple.
Yeah, I mean, even pre-operating system, one of the others that I came across was certainly in the firmware of some, as it was then, HP server systems that was deeply embedded in their firmware. So it didn't matter how many times that you rebuilt an OS inside an actual HP server of that particular incident that I caught, it reinstalled that rootkit back onto the OS because it was inside the actual firmware itself.
And put there, this was a favorite for us when we used to do a lot of internal network penetration tests and red team exercises, because sitting there, let's see if my brain will, port 2301 TCP was an HTTP server that was, as you say, launched from firmware on HP servers to allow remote administration of those servers independent of the operating system. And the first versions of that were as secure as a chocolate fireguard. They got more and more secure with time, of course, as people poked holes in them. They even went mad and implemented HTTPS. But those sorts of tools were wonderfully useful, would allow us to enumerate the user, let's say, Windows users and user groups and permissions without ever logging on to Windows, because it was sitting underneath the operating system functionally. And that's what we mean by rootkits. In terms of implementing it in firmware, if you're a hardware manufacturer like HP were in this context, then that's the obvious place to put it. And that, of course, is our biggest concern today, is looking at the development of malicious rootkits that are embedded in firmware. And that doesn't mean they have to be installed or created by the original manufacturer. They can be burnt into firmware later in the ownership cycle. And it's not just servers and workstations, laptops. We can also be looking at things like routers, switches and printers, which is in some respects a lot more scary, I think.
And phones these days as well. I mean, looking at one of the articles that happened back in March this year, there was certainly one that was embedded in Androids and was still stuck there even after factory resetting. So again, for our users, I'm sure we'll share some links to some of the articles that we've researched for this piece during the posting of after this discussion. But there's some really interesting reading there about really and truly how these are now becoming more everyday in a computer user's life. So, which is why we're enlightening people and raising awareness, one of our favorite terms, of this type of exploit.
Yeah, and there's a number of vectors that can be used to install this sort of firmware-based rootkit on a victim's machine. You start with the traditional phishing or spear phishing attack, because so many people will continue to use their computer on a day-to-day basis with admin level privilege. and that makes it fairly easy for if someone's unfortunate enough to click on the wrong link to infect the machine, they will have software on there that's out of date. You might be a jolly good citizen and constantly update your Windows patches every month, but the average Windows user has 60, 70, 80 pieces of software running on their machine, probably half of which they don't even know are there, which are there for the right reasons or because that's how it came out of the box. And those will need patching too. And if they're not, that's another exploit that can be used to infect. So a vulnerability that the user might not even know is extant. And of course, hijacking the update process is another favorite. So, someone gets a little message up saying your audio driver is out of date, or you need to install the latest version of Adobe Reader or whatever it might be. And if they're not careful, that too can be a vector to install a rootkit. So there's lots of ways in.
Yeah, and another one to bring to the attention of people there was the Chinese use of the WinTI rootkit, which again was a use of a bunch of stolen game update drivers, which were based on signed certificates. So again, as most of us will know, but explaining to the layman, if you're updating any software, you need some sort of digitally signed certificate to perform that update. And it is alleged that the Chinese had stolen a load of these game developers' digital certificates to perform this sort of rootkit hijacking and installation, so that your update systems wouldn't really even know, and it wouldn't alert you, nor would your antivirus pick up stuff like that. So
yeah, that's the biggest worry really from the consumer point of view, is that some antivirus software will detect some rootkits, but if you use, I don't know whether the audience knows about VirusTotal, but the VirusTotal site has an amalgamation of dozens of the most popular antivirus products, and you can upload a file or a signature to VirusTotal, and it will run it against all these different AV engines and give you a ranking of how likely it is that particular executable or whatever is in fact malware. And the variation is significant. And when we get down to rootkits, you're not going to be uploading an executable, are you? You just think, my machine seems to be behaving a little oddly. It's Windows and it's blue screening a bit more often than I'd normally expect. Insert joke about Windows blue screen here. Or maybe the machine's just running a little more slowly than you'd expect. Insert another joke about Windows there. Maybe it's just, I don't remember that happening before. Just a feel that the user has. And so they're going to rely on their AV software. Maybe they'll launch a scan instead of just letting it sit in the background. But there's no guarantee that the antivirus that they've chosen is going to be able to detect that rootkit. So it becomes a little bit of a foggy area for a lot of non-IT professionals, I think.
Yeah, which carefully moves us onto our next question, really, which is about that rising relevance of rootkit exploits. And again, another one I had here, which was an absolute shocker, but what I've penned as not a rootkit as we know it, Jim, is more the Avast and AVG released a security update back in May based on a vulnerability that had been around in their products for over a decade. And again, this one was an absolute doozy, because for those who don't know, Avast and AVG joined forces and formed a merger back in, I think it was 2021 now. It might have been earlier than that. But that hole was found certainly by SentinelOne. And yeah, it dated back to two huge vulnerabilities. So anyone running those two antivirus bits of kit, just know if you haven't updated them, they are available there, and we'll put the links in the mentions below. But it is worth knowing that all of these antivirus softwares don't necessarily protect you from those rootkits. Some of them which are very, very old vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't personally these days put a lot of faith in antivirus completeness. Hence me mentioning VirusTotal earlier, and anything that I find suspicious, I will submit to that site just to get as many views on it as possible. Clearly, you're going to create problems for yourself if you install and run more than one antivirus tool on your computer at once. So having a cloud service where you can submit something suspicious and have a lot of second, third, and fourth opinions is worth doing. But yeah, I think it's like the old-fashioned hit parade, isn't it? When you say which is the best antivirus, that changes week by week, and some are consistently better than others. And a lot of the time, I'd say to the consumer, you get what you pay for. So if it's free, maybe, but it doesn't mean that the expensive ones or the ones that with names that everyone knows. I'm not going to name anything at all there that Norton that might confuse anyone, but they might be rubbish. So
absolutely, but that is just to say that most, if not all, reasonably good antivirus vendors do provide facilities to upload your suspected or suspicious malware, be they rootkits or be they other malware variable entities as such. But it's not just about those, and obviously, I mean, we advocate that you not only look at antivirus, but you look at zero-day vulnerability software as well these days. We're not going to mention any names or promote anyone, but certainly looking at those, I mean, I started using those back good, I suppose, 10 years ago now, I suppose, and they've come a long way since. Because typical antivirus wasn't working for me in the previous clients that I served back then. But with the rise of remote working, especially, this is more than a home user problem. And again, where more entities sent their users home to work during the actual pandemic, there were things like the FireChili rootkit, again, allegedly issued by Chinese hacking group Deep Panda, that targeted specifically VMware Horizon servers.
Yeah.
So that is another interesting one in terms of remote capability, and links back to the Log4Shell exploit that was very prevalent over Christmas last year, moving into this sort of 2022 Q1.
You mentioning VMware environments is really relevant. Any OS that sits on a hypervisor, anything that's a virtual OS, you don't have the best possible defense against firmware-based rootkits because you don't have secure boot, and that's a challenge. If you've got a modern, what do we mean by modern? A more recent computer, and that computer is using the UEFI boot sequence and has secure boot, then you are much better protected against these really deep level rootkits than if you're using a traditional BIOS-based machine or if you've got the secure boot turned off. But if you're in a virtual environment, you don't have that option. So a rootkit that's nicely targeted against a hypervisor is going to be very scary and very dangerous.
Yeah, that's one of the biggies that I think we've seen a lot more of. Again, if you're using more home use stuff and your IT department have or your cybersecurity vendor have recommended that you use different tools for your home-based machines or remote working machines, do take them up on it. They may seem a pain at times, especially when it comes to installing new software on your home use computer, be they work deployed or be they bring your own device type scheme. Do go for it because they do add that extra added protection more than any home use or antivirus system can actually provide. But also on that front, I mean, there are a lot of multi-use computers at homes, and I think one of the last ones we're going to look at in this entity was the makers of League of Legends. They, who are Riot Games, sorry, off the top of my memory, they installed rootkits in their new hit game called Valorant at the start of the year. So all of those people who either play or have children who certainly played League of Legends would certainly know about Riot Games and their gaming systems. But knowing that a good, supposedly good software developer has then installed a rootkit because they're launching a new game in there, be that for the auspices of saying, well, it's for our anti-cheat systems or whatever, know that these things are out there and these things do affect you. So sometimes, as we know and as we've discussed during this episode, it's not just about the antivirus picking it up, but it's also about looking at what else is on your machine and being careful about what you're having to install in there, especially if you're dual using that for work.
Yeah, I mean, really, it makes my hair stand on end that people would do it, but I'm sure you're right that people will use machines that they have played games on for work purposes. They're not all as crazy as me with separate machines, separate networks, and so on. And you know, you might think, for example, you're nice and safe on a modern Mac, because of all the effort that Apple has put into securing the boot sequence and so on. And then you go and install Parallels so you can run Windows on that Mac, and suddenly you've turned off that secure boot again because Parallels will do that. So, you know, I really think people have to look very carefully at the constraints around using a home computer for work purposes. It's really not as safe as you might hope. And obviously, once a rootkit's in place, if it, as its name describes, if it's a kit, then it's going to be doing network exploration. And whether you're using a VPN or not to connect to the office, once that rootkit's there, it will find that VPN, it will trace, it'll go down that VPN, it'll explore the network at the other end. You know, it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it was so important to mention this and bring this up as a topic, because hiding behind a VPN, thinking it's secure and it will keep you protected, is a misnomer.
Mm. Yeah, it is. It's completely wrong. VPNs are great to protect you from, say, opportunistic attacks on a public Wi-Fi, something like that. And yeah, it's all very wonderful because everything is tunneled from the endpoint to the corporate network. So you think you're not going to be worried about, say, router-based attacks on your own home network. But you know, once something's deep inside your machine, as rootkits are, no matter where they live, whether they live on the hard drive or in the firmware, once they're there, you're really, your machine's compromised. End of story. It doesn't matter what other controls you put in place on top of it; they're worthless.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of different methods and rootkits that we've mentioned in this, but how would we go about with clients helping them clean it up?
Well, now that's it. I have my own personal issue about this, and it's a very simplistic approach, but not one that many people these days seem to take. And if I'm worried about a machine, I think that machine may be infected, rather than spending ages trying to dig inside it and determine through, you know, diagnostic software whether it's infected or not. I would put it on a hub. Remember those before switches? or I would put it on a switch in whatever that's called, where you turn the thingy on and it becomes a hub. Anyway, that, and look at the traffic, because in the end, if you've got a rootkit, it will generate traffic. It might go quiet for a while, but you know, if you stick it on there and you've got a packet sniffer on another machine sitting on the same node, in effect, you'll soon see if there's some suspicious traffic, and that'll tell you straight away. But anyway, that's just a personal obsession. If it's rootkitted on the hard drive, my approach would be to reformat the whole machine from scratch. If it's rootkitted in the firmware, Well, I wouldn't throw the machine away, but I'd reflash it back to the factory standard if you understand how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, then throw the machine away.
Yeah, yeah. For everyday users, again, flashing hardware isn't that difficult, but you have to go back to the original manufacturers. There was a big piece a few years ago about Intel processors and the weaknesses that were involved in those processors alone. But again, it does simply involve a secure blank USB key inserted into the right slot in your computer to be able to put that back to a default factory firmware that you can always download off of the manufacturer's website. And that goes for anything. It's not just processors, again, but they're mainly hardware based. So again, if you don't know what you're doing and you're worried about something that your machine's suddenly really slow or it's doing things that you really can't explain, use your IT resources, contact us if you need to, cix.org.uk, and we can certainly help you with that. But we also, as separate entities, have some very good people that we can pull on board to help any organisation with their cybersecurity needs.
Wow, well, that was fun. I think we're nearly out of time, aren't we? Have I answered everything you wanted?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always a pleasure, as always. But again, digging through your knowledge and your historical background in this, Pete, is always fascinating. So thank you for that. Again, I hope it's made good sense to our users and provides them with not necessarily a frightening set of stories, but I think what has been certainly a more relevant set of explanations to what's been going on in the actual news of cybersecurity, but to everyday users. And again, it's something that we need to make more apparent to people and provide them with ways to actually get around these things rather than just sitting there panicking, thinking, oh my God, I've lost everything.
Yeah, knowledge is power, my friend. We will, as you said, we'll put a bunch of links down in the comments on the YouTube site below this video, so you can follow through and read some of the research material that we use, and also some of the links to help you if you feel you have this sort of problem.
Okay, I think I'm going to clamber out of my darkened room and go and enjoy some sun now.
Okay, have fun, have a lovely day. And thanks again for today's chat.
Bye.
Take care now. Bye.